Good evening, everyone. My name is Gustavo Gomez, and I am a fourth-year undergraduate student at UCLA, majoring in economics. And this is Germán Olivares, a first-year MBA student at Anderson. We're co-directors of today's final panel discussion titled The Opening Up of Latin America, the importance of intra-regional trade and global cooperation of Latin America's future. With the slowdown in the region's trade and declining investments in the region's economies, financial markets have responded with the depreciation of the region's main currencies. While in the past, such reversals have caused panic and capital outflows, this time has been different. Better macroeconomic policies have allowed many countries to adjust smoothly.
Our moderator today and the panelists will discuss how Latin American corporations are growing and benefiting from intra-regional trade of various countries. They will also talk about the expectations they have for Latin American multinationals and what emerging companies can do in order to expand across the region and become global players. The distinguished speakers here on this panel are all UCLA and/or UCLA Anderson alumni here, so we're delighted to welcome them back to campus. Mr. Joseph Barragan, he's an MBA class of 1979 and BA in 1977, both here at UCLA. He's a managing director at Strategic Financing Advisor and former managing director at JP Morgan Chase. Mr. Claudio Chamorro is MBA class of 2002 here at Anderson. He is the CFO at Parque Arauco in Chile, and Ambassador Alejandro Wolff, BA 1978. He's been introduced before. He is the former United States Ambassador for Chile. The panel will be moderated by Kati Suominen. She is an adjunct professor of global economics here at UCLA Anderson, and she is also the founder and CEO of two companies, Next Trade Group and Trade Up Capital Fund. So please welcome them with a round of applause.
Thanks very much, and thank you all for staying. I know it's Friday and last panel on Friday, and we have an award at the end, which is a nice reception, so please stay for that. By the way, the panel is better than the reception, so you'll have a great time. As was discussed, Latin America kind of epitomizes in many ways what we see in the news about the global economy, right? We see economic slowdown, slumping of trade, cooling of China, slowdown in commodity prices, currency roller coasters, and such. This is all inflicting Latin America. At the same time, we have a lot of new opportunities in Latin America that are perhaps a little bit under the radar. We have great opportunities in real estate, in infrastructure, in consumer products, niche products, agricultural products, renewable energy, you name it. A lot of dynamism and opportunities if you know where to look. What our panel is going to tackle today is, which of these futures hold? Is the Latin America, are we in the slowdown Latin America, or are we in for a dynamic Latin America? Or are we perhaps in for a little bit of both? Some countries kind of being the laggards of the region and others being the dynamic leaders of the region, and which sectors are going to be the hot growth sectors, and first and foremost, how to really tap them if you're interested in the region, whether you're a company in the region, in Latin America, or you're a US company, California company, seeking to tap those opportunities there. And we have a fantastic panel. You have their bios. Could not be a better lineup. People from financial services, real estate, government affairs. They have seen the region also transform itself. We're perhaps in a kind of an inflection point again in the region. In the 1990s, 1980s, the region changed completely, right? From dictatorships to democracies, from closed economies, protected from trade and investment, to thriving, booming markets for foreign investors. And we had a heavy hand in the economic management in the region, and now things are privatized. Completely different region if you think of it in the 30-year cycle rather than the past couple of years. And can Latin America kind of transform itself again through trade, through investment, through new discovery of these new opportunities in the region? So with that, why don't I turn to Joseph Barragan, and he has an extensive background in financial services and investment banking. And Joseph, if you could kind of discuss how you see the financial markets in Latin America. What are the risk factors? How do multinational companies look at the region now? How do Latin American multinationals look at the world as they are navigating this choppy global economic environment?
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. And the Latin American multinationals I'm going to talk quite a bit about because, well, we've heard all day about tremendous optimism in Latin America, which I share, and I'm sort of pleased that we've been hearing this from all the different panels in different sectors. I don't think we've spoken enough about why I think we can believe that that optimism should continue, although we're seeing a decline in commodity prices. We're not sure exactly whether the Fed will continue to hike rates, and if the Fed continues to hike rates, will the central banks in Latin America go along with it? If they don't, what'll happen? If they do, what'll happen? There are risks to the system, tremendous risks. But something that has come out of Latin America, a very favorable outcome of what I believe have been increased trade, both trade agreements as well as foreign investment. I don't think you can separate the two. Trade and foreign investment come together. Is the development of the managerial class, the business leaders. It's absolutely amazing when you see the quality of the business class in Latin America and how they've developed over the last 15, 20, 25 years. To the point where you have got some world-class companies and industries and sectors being run by Latin Americans. And not because there's some natural competitive advantage. It's just the old-fashioned managerial spirit. We heard about the fighting spirit, It's the old-fashioned managerial spirit that I think arose because they began to feel that they were going to be threatened. I can remember Mexico when we were looking at NAFTA. A lot of Mexicans didn't want to see NAFTA go through because they were afraid that they were going to be flooded by all of these U.S. companies and there wasn't going to be a Mexican company anymore. They were all going to be owned by U.S. companies. Well, what happened? Look at the cement industry, okay? The cement industry started off in Mexico by different companies, some with pretty good management, others with less qualified management, different scale. What emerged from that was Cemex that consolidated the industry within Mexico and then began to look at the industry outside of Mexico. And we don't typically think of cement as something of a transportable. Beyond a certain distance, it just isn't very cost effective to transport. But what was Cemex exporting? Their management skill. And they ended up buying plants throughout the world and today are one of the leaders, one of the top 2, 3 cement manufacturers in the world with operations all over the world. Okay, I was incredibly impressed one time calling on senior management of Cemex, and this was mid-90s or so, and the gentleman had a computer right next to his desk, actually with several monitors, okay, and he was constantly looking at it. It was actually getting to the point of being a little bit annoying, constantly looking at it, and every once in a while he just had to tap something. And I thought it was a Bloomberg screen. Come from financial services, we think of Bloomberg screens. What it was a screen showing them the temperature of the different kilns in different factories that they had throughout the world, okay? And he was able to see exactly what was happening in each one of the plants that they had. And he could see what shipments were being made in that particular moment, where they were going, etc. So it's that kind of management, technology, bringing it all together. But that's not the only example. And we heard a little bit of some countries doing better than others. We heard Brazil is particularly challenged right now, but that hasn't kept some Brazilians from investing throughout the world and becoming leaders. Whoever would have thought that Anheuser-Busch effectively is owned by a Brazilian investment group? Yet that was Ambev. Jorge Paulo Lehmann and his management team and investors started buying up breweries in South America, ended up taking on InBev in Europe, ended up taking on Anheuser-Busch and a slew of other people, and now they're moving into snacks and food with their acquisition through their private investment firm of Heinz and Burger King and others, okay? Meat, JBS, one of the largest manufacturers of slaughterhouses and producers of meat. So I just think these trade arrangements have brought management to a completely different level. I could go on and on and on with other examples. Now, it has opened, get back to financial services, it has opened certain markets to foreign investment, interestingly enough. And there's been lots of interest. There was comment earlier about why don't we see Latin American banks in California, okay? Yet we do see, when it comes to Mexico, Mexico really being dominated by foreign financial institutions. The largest bank in Banamex is a wholly owned subsidiary of Citibank. The next largest bank was Bancomer, now BBV Comer, okay? And you have to get down to the third largest bank, Banorte, which is wholly owned by Mexican investors. And the Brazilians have moved outside of Brazil. Banco Itaú, they've got this great slogan that say they want to be the Latin American bank, and they're acquiring banks throughout the region. One of the last big ones was in Chile, where they picked up Core Banca. So you do see a lot of this movement, and I think that will be very good for Latin America. And I think that's the foundation why I think that we're going to continue to see tremendous investment, trade flows, and growth in the region.
Terrific.
Okay.
Well, that's a great overview and very optimistic
Very
for that.
optimistic.
Now, to Claudio Chamorro, you are in real estate in Chile as well as in Colombia and Peru.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why you are in those markets and not necessarily in Mexico or Brazil. And real estate in many ways is a barometer of what's going on in the regional economies as well. So would you be able to kind of give us a sense of what you see in the real estate markets and what are the pockets of growth and how are the different markets comparing to each other?
Okay, good. And well, good afternoon, and I'm really happy to be here. And I'm very, very thanks for the invitation that gave me the Latin American Business Association and Lucy. And yes, as you were mentioned, we are right now in Chile, Peru, and Colombia. These are three different countries with different situation in the real estate market. I think our company, Parque Arauco, has shopping centers in these three countries. We are in the rent real estate industry. We are not selling, we rent those stores in the shopping centers. So basically we manage a long-term business. And when we decide to go to a new country, basically we are looking for a very stable country. For us, one of the important things is probably inflation, and the other important thing is interest rates. Financing this big shopping center is obviously a key issue in the success of this business. And right now, what we are seeing in Latin America, particularly in Chile, Peru, and Colombia, and think, although this most of the volatility is being captured by the exchange rates, if you are able to hedge your investment in those countries, you are good to continue with your business. There is no, when you see the volatility is not moving to other variables. Like the inflation is going up right now, but it's going up from 3% to 4.5% or so, which is still very low compared with what we used to see in Latin America with 10%, 50%, 18%, or whatever. So I'm really very optimistic about what's going on right now in Latin America. And I think countries are totally different. Joe was making a point about the managers, but also I think the quality of the policy in some countries is very good, and people in central banks are doing a very good job and try to concentrate all the effect in flexible exchange rate, I would say. I think this is an important issue here, and also the situation of Chile, Peru, and Colombia is in some way still, although the growth is slow right now. We are saying 2%, 3%, or something like that. in the 80s, with a similar situation in the macroeconomic environment, we see depreciation, we see recession in those countries. So I think the situation in Latin America, I think, is better now and that it was before.
Terrific. Well, with that, I'll turn to Ambassador Alex Wolff. You are ambassador to Chile, and Chile is in many ways kind of the star of Latin America in terms of macroeconomic management, in terms of trade integration, tremendous array of trade agreements, and now is a member of TPP as well as the Pacific Alliance. Great progress there. How do you, and now you advise governments as well as multinational companies that are interested in Latin America. So in light of the trade integration that has been happening in TPP, you have the Pacific Alliance, you have increasing US interest, of course, in these economies. Everybody has an FTA on the Pacific side with the US. So what's your kind of stock taking of the region? It seems like some people are talking about two Latin Americas, the Atlantic side and the Pacific side, very different scenarios, and how would you assess the setting for U.S. cooperation?
Well, I would start by saying it's a very differentiated system. This is what we tell our clients, that depending on what sector you're interested in investing in, what type of business you're in, there's some countries that are going to be much more lucrative and easier to deal with than others, and they're not always the same ones. We do have a structure still that is lingering, which is 3.5, I would say, groupings, characterizing in a very general sense the types of differentiated structures that you have. The Mercosur countries, Pacific Alliance countries, ALBA countries, and the half is Cuba, which we don't talk much about, but I think we should start talking about at some point. And as everyone has mentioned before, both speakers, Claudio and Joseph, this is essentially a good news story across the board. But it could be a better news story. We're talking about a region from Mexico south that is going to have, by the end of this year, about 625 million people. Larger than the European Union, larger than the United States and Canada put together. Huge potential, growing middle class, and yet when you look at the types of problems and difficulties just in doing business, particularly for first-time entrants who are unfamiliar with these countries, it boggles my mind that they aren't doing more. The potential is immense, but there's some structural difficulties still. We can talk about the impediments and difficulties simply in intra-regional arrangements. Imagine an internal market, if you will, if you conceive it as such, of 625 million people. Most of the countries in Latin America place their immediate neighbors way down the line in terms of principal trade partners. They trade more with North America, with Asia, with individual European countries than they do with their immediate neighbors. And it's another area where I think the potential with good, sound public policies, in some instances it's going to take some cultural changes, in some instances it may take crises like we're seeing in Brazil to sort of be the wake-up call that allow people to put behind some of the old shackles and weights that they continue to labor under and grasp this immense opportunity that exists in the region.
What would be, if you had, or your clients had their wish list, what would be some of the key constraints that you would like to see removed? Is it about infrastructure? Is it about policy barriers in order for that intra-regional integration to blossom?
Governance, immensely important. The number of businessmen who, again, first-time exporters to the region who I would see, because I wanted to see them all when I was an ambassador, and I would ask them, why are you in Chile? 17 million people at the end of the world. Why aren't you in Brazil? 200 million people. Mexico, 100 million people. Colombia. And they looked at me as if I was the one who was insane. And they started listing intangibles, not concrete businesses. Security, stability, rule of law, predictability, regulatory environment, governance, a whole range of issues that had nothing to do with the business model. And it's sort of made me think those are the sorts of things I think that will encourage confidence. Brazil's a perfect example. Again, should be the most attractive market by far in the hemisphere right now in terms of potential. Nobody wants to go. They see these corruption crises, they see these governance crises, they see this unpredictability, the problems created by Petrobras, et cetera. And these are huge deterrents. And so you need to overcome those psychological and intangible barriers in order to take full advantage of the economic potential that exists in all these countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a big element of risk management. Of course, you would like those risks to be mitigated to begin with, but let's take the currency issues. You've been, Mr. Barragan, looking at those probably. How do you see that in the region, particularly for companies that are doing cross-border trade, either with the region or from the region with the rest of the world?
Yeah, well, what I think we learned earlier today, starting with Professor Edwards' presentation. I mean, Latin America has known FX volatility for a very long time, okay? In fact, some of the best people that trade FX grew up in Latin America and are now sitting on trading desks in London and New York and doing it all day long. So they understand the risks. Now, that doesn't make it any easier, but the FX risk itself is sort of comes with the territory, unfortunately. And while I do agree that things should be better, the reality is right now we're going to go through a period where Latin America is seeing a lot of its currencies devalue over time, and management has to deal with it. And they all deal with it differently. As I mentioned, some of them deal with it by having it invested outside of the country, so they have this natural hedge. So fine, if the Mexican peso declines, well, they've got investments in the U.S., their U.S. businesses are increasing in value, and at the end of the day, they can report fairly solid earnings. Now, there's all kinds of techniques that companies can use to hedge their risks. But I do think there's a warning out there. I don't know if everybody remembers sort of in the 2008 period where some companies had entered into some complex derivative transactions in order to, these are Mexican companies primarily, in order to hedge the FX risk when, at that time, again, the Mexican peso was sliding against the dollar. And everybody from Comercial Mexicana, which was a big retailer, woke up one day having to report huge losses that shocked the market because it just wasn't something you would normally see in a large retailer supermarket chain like that, because their losses were much more than what was reflective of their businesses. So I think a lot of treasurers are trying to find ways to hedge the risk. They're going to invoke different tools depending on the nature of their business and what their FX imbalances are. But they're also going to have to be very cautious and not to be speculative about it, to be true hedges versus what's happened in the past. But I don't see that as a long-term deterrent. I just see that as an issue that needs to be dealt with, one of the many risks that managers have to work with.
Great. And Claudio, wanted to turn back to you on talking about Brazil, conceivably a huge market, and for real estate also. Now, you would think that asset prices are favorable at this time in Brazil. So how do you see Brazil from your vantage point? And perhaps you've also seen foreign companies that are interested in investing in Latin American real estate, and how would they view the real estate sector?
Yeah, I mean, how Alejandro said that Brazil is huge in terms of population, and still is at least in shopping centers, is very low penetrated. And right now it's like a 64 square meter of GLA per 1,000 inhabitants. If you compare that number with the state, it's 2,000 per 1,000 inhabitants. I'm not saying that Brazil is going to be like United States in the short term, but I think there is a huge gap. And also, the other, for example, an important figure is how much of the retail sales happens in a shopping center. In Brazil, 20% of the retail sales happens in a shopping center. In the States, again, 60% of the retail sales happens in a shopping center. So there is a huge market. And right now, there is a meltdown. There is this, as Brian said at the beginning of the afternoon, the GDP fall 3.5% during the last quarter in Brazil. But if you want to be in the real estate business, and which is a long-term business, which, for example, when we build a shopping center, we're not building a shopping center for the next year. We are building a shopping center for the next 40 years. So if I would have the chance to be very, very efficient in timing, what my dream is to build in recession and to open in boom. If I build in recession, I'm going to have low cost in cement, low cost in iron, low cost in everything. Everybody wants to learn, give me money to invest in those shopping centers. So, I mean, I think this is an interesting time when, and also in our company, we were very focused in trying to buy another companies, for example, in the shopping center area. And during the boom, when you get close to them and said, okay, I'm going to buy your company. Okay, yes, the price is 100 times EBITDA, and we said, okay, it's a nice company, but I think I'm going to come back another time. And right now, I think everybody is starting to review their portfolios, and they said, okay, maybe it's not the time that I have to have my money in this kind of assets. So so I think right now it's a very interesting time, and people get confused about what the asset price are. If you see the world in a very short term, you're gonna get confused too. But if you have the time and you have the money to see this in just a longer time, probably you're going to see a lot of opportunities, and particularly in Brazil.
It's terrific. And before we open it up, I'll just use my prerogative here with Ambassador Wolff. U.S. elections are coming, and there are already some indications of where the candidates may want to at least say that they would like to do on trade policy issues. And 20 years ago, we had the aspiration for the free trade area of the Americas. Is there anything like that? How do you see the kind of Washington perspective and trade policy in the next administration, and how that will shape opportunities for U.S. companies to do business in Latin America? Or will there be any difference to the current state?
Trade policy tends over the long term to homogenize among the parties, despite what one hears in election campaigns. Yeah. My sense is, if I were to predict, is it's unlikely we're going to get TPP ratified by the Senate this year. So that will be on the agenda early on for the new administration, regardless of party. And I think the other initiative, the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, is the other half of this administration's trade agenda, and that will, given the difficulties that Europe is facing, that probably will take another year or two to negotiate. Between those two agreements, you've captured about 80% of global trade. So, and the outliers, China, the BRICS, will have to decide how they're going to relate to those groups. So in terms of, I don't anticipate large new initiatives. I think those are, mouthfuls, and difficult to digest. So, and in both instances, they'll carry over into the next administration.
Terrific. So let's open it up. Questions to the panelists?
This is a question for anyone on the panel, including Professor Suominen.
Okay.
In the 1960s, I'm reluctant to admit that I remember this, there was a European economist named Servan Schreiber who wrote a book called The American Challenge, in which he warned Europeans of the danger of losing their economic processes to American investors. American investment at that time was flowing into Europe. So my question is, if an economist in Brazil or Mexico or Chile, would they write such a book today? And if they would, what would the title be?
So who wants to go first?
Wow. Well, they could always write the book. I'm not sure what the title would be. That would be a tough one for me to answer. I just don't think it would be proven over time, okay? Yes, Mexico's going through a difficult time. The United States economy is much stronger. We've already seen that kind of concern right prior to the passage of NAFTA. So I just don't think it would resonate. I think that you could find enough Mexican entrepreneurs, you could find enough Mexican industrialists to give really good competition to any U.S. company moving in. And I'd say the same with Brazil, although Brazil has got their other challenges. I mean, they just have many more impediments to investing in the country from outside. So I don't see that as a real issue. I wouldn't see anybody actually writing it. No.
How do you would write the book?
I mean, what I have been seeing in the last 12 months in Chile, at least, or 24 months, is actually what the Chilean entrepreneurs have been doing is they have been selling their companies to the foreigners. Mm? And probably one of the reasons is in the past they were expecting or they were able to capitalize high growth rates. And for now, what you see for the next 5 years, probably, you're going to see a modest growth in Chile, Peru, Colombia, and so on. And probably they are seeing more opportunities in other countries or in other investment or whatever, but what you have been seeing as a fact is several Chilean companies right now are in the hand of the multinational companies such as, for example, Abbott just entering in Chile and they bought a chemical in Santiago, Spaniard energy companies. They bought another energy company in Chile just 6 months ago. And this is a trend that has been happening. I don't think somebody's seeing this like a risk of losing the country or something like that. And I think it's the way of doing business right now. And but again, I think there are a lot of opportunities, and I'm not really afraid of what's the capital inflows coming in.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with a comment because we've seen that phenomenon happen before in Latin America. We've seen it in financial services and in other sectors where the savvy local investor will effectively sell high, okay, and sell to a multinational that's been dying to get into the market and know when to sell. And there's even been examples where those same investors have bought the company back 3, 4, 5, 6 years later when the country's gone through one of its cycles. I think we've heard from a lot of the earlier panels, you really got to know the country well if you're going to invest in the country. And you've got to see it through various cycles. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if on some of these sales, these same Chilean investors, 4, 5, 6 years from now, are back in buying at a discount.
Yeah,
do you have comments on the question? Or?
No, it's an interesting question. I think those books are constantly being written and reflect more, I think, the culture of the country from which the author comes rather than any, and they're still being written in France. and I suspect in most Latin American countries, you still have sectors that would continue to maybe not write, but certainly purchase and read books like that.
Hi,
Please.
my name is Michelle Jaramillo. I'm an Ecuadorian student, and my question is about this phenomenon that you said before of domestic companies being sold to foreign investors. So I wanted to ask you if you think this phenomenon is due to the lack of governmental support to entrepreneurs, to domestic entrepreneurs, like, I don't know, like fiscal support or something like that. Thank you.
I think one of the phenomena that have been happening, at least in Chile, in the last 24 months, is there is some feeling of entrepreneur is not something right to do. If you are an entrepreneur, you are guilty of something. We don't know exactly what, but you are guilty. So people who have been working hard to have their companies, they have been feeling that is something that the country is not recognizing. So if you have to, if you have been fighting all of your life trying to build a big company, and from time to time somebody or the community or the government or everybody is trying to spontaneously thinking you are doing something which is not right, probably this is a good reason to sell, and particularly if also you have the timing that right now is you are in the height, and maybe in the future you will have the chance to buy it back. I think all of those together make a perfect scenario to sell this to a foreigner who have been trying to go into the country for many years and having had the chance after some depreciation of the local currency. And I think this is my main answer.
Picking up on that, kind of foreigners looking to get into the region, there is kind of an elephant in the room, which is Cuba, and a lot of interest by U.S. companies to penetrate Cuba. And Ambassador Wolff, you've been looking into this and advising some clients how to get into market now when the opportunity is right. And what are some of the challenges that your clients have faced, and you're counseling them to take into account?
Well, I was there in February and had a number of meetings and was able to travel around and look. And I think everyone recognizes what a great opportunity exists in Cuba. Already the number of American visitors has tripled since the announcement of the opening by the Obama administration last year. From the Cuban perspective, I think they're conflicted still. They recognize that there is a need to change and open up, because if they don't, they're not going to be able to sustain the regime and the structure for much longer. The Cuban population expects certain subsidies, expects certain support from the government, and the government doesn't have the resources and the revenue stream to provide them. So it's a decision born out of necessity, I would describe it, rather out of conviction. And that creates its own dynamic, including resistance within the party, and strong resistance in some sectors. So it's a constant, ongoing debate. We see this all the time in other countries, and it's a dynamic process. It's not settled yet, and probably won't be settled for some time. The other challenge is our own U.S. regulations and the embargo. We have opened up a little bit, and there's some sectors that are completely open now. Telecom. If you're in the telecom business, information technology, you don't even need to apply for a license from OFAC anymore. You can self-license and explore the opportunities. It's probably no coincidence that the one sector that's completely open from the U.S. perspective is the very same sector that the Cubans want to have nothing to do with foreigners investing in. And so they've told us that telecom is closed. So you've got that great middle, which is, they need everything, agricultural investment, construction. We can't get involved as Americans in tourism and hospitality, which is the thing that the Cubans want to do the most. So right now there's sort of a, odd dance taking place where the things that are easier for American businesses to do are very difficult to do from the Cuban perspective, and the reverse, the things that the Cubans are particularly eager to see American investment in are things that the US government still can't authorize. So again, another story of immense potential. It's going to require some patience. I don't know how many of you have been, but the architecture is fantastic, the culture is fantastic, the people are wonderful. The beaches are, as not as any beach you'll ever see anywhere in the world. So getting in there early is important. I think that's going to evolve also as we see European companies and Latin American companies take advantage of that and take advantage of their regulatory structures, and hopefully we'll be able to compete at some point.
Do you have comments on that?
I'll with a comment. Yeah, and people are probably going to find this kind of strange, but let me say it anyways. It's interesting to say strange things in these forums, okay? I kind of put China and Cuba in the same bucket, okay, with one major caveat. And this isn't reflective of the Cuban people or the country, okay? But as a foreign investor, when we talk about countries that don't have a rule of law, they're both in the same bucket, okay? And a very opaque political system. Nobody really knows what's going on. I don't think the West really knows what's going on in China, nor in Cuba. Obviously, both countries want some opening with foreign countries and foreign investors, but always on their terms, okay? Not on mutually satisfactory terms. The big caveat is a lot of companies can't afford not to be in China, because if it ends up being a payoff, how are you going to explain that to your board that, well, we decided we weren't going to invest in China, although it's the biggest opportunity in the world, okay? Cuba, on the other hand, you've got much more of a risk-return kind of decision there where, do I really put a lot into it, and what am I going to get out of it? Because it is a small country.
Market.
Having said that, I could see tourism, very big, and I don't have any personal experience from this, but we've read a lot about in some of the scientific fields, some of the medical fields. Cuba's done a lot of advances in some of eye surgery, et cetera, and maybe that is something that they could offer the world. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, no doubt about it.
Claudio, do you have any Cuba
No.
related? No. Please.
I
you
don't
have
know.
a question?
You all mentioned some time that some countries in Latin America, Chile, Colombia, Peru, they are facing next 5 years maybe of slow growth. So as both businessmen and citizens, would the change would you like to see for that to not go into a perpetual thing or even down, but build a next step into their each country's future?
Yeah.
Could I?
Yep. What could I say extra? We are seeing, what is different today, I think, compared to other crises right now is, for example, in the case of Chile, the last crisis before this one, I remember 1998 with the Asian crisis. At that time, the exchange rate was was fixed, and the interest rate was managed by the central bank, and they managed the short-term rate and the long-term rate, and they did a bad decision, and they moved the interest rate one day from 5% to 100%. And that was the one-day interest rate, the banking interest rate in Chile in 1998. And all the construction company suffered a lot with that policy mix. Right now, what you are seeing is the interest rates are very low. If you are overstocked, it's not really, I mean, it's expensive, but it's not as expensive as it was before. You can fly over this mess for a while. So I think things, in my view, are accommodating again to this new situation. Probably there are winners, are losers. In 1998, I remember, we're all losers. No winners there. So if with the new exchange rate, there are industries where are doing better, and others are doing worse. There are opportunities, as I mentioned, in the industry that I work for. There are opportunities because right now there are people who is able to sell their assets. There are opportunities because right now you can build cheaper. And so I don't think, I think the companies and the economies are more prepared to turn out to be more accelerating their growth with no with big difference regarding the past. Particularly, for example, in the case of Chile, considering 2014, the foreign investment that the Chilean company has made in other countries, it's add up $100 billion, which is a huge amount of money, never seen in the Chilean economy in the past. And that investment is right now there. Companies are bigger now, they are more stronger, they are they are risk diversified, they are in different countries in Latin America, they are in different countries in the world. If there is a ranking of BCG, they call the global challengers, which are companies were coming from the developing countries. In the 100 largest companies in that ranking, 26 companies came from Latin America. Those companies have been growing 3 times faster than the non-financial 500, Fortune 500 companies in America. So right now is in the same part of the world, is Latin America, but you have stronger companies, you have a better mix of macroeconomic policy. The only thing that I really am concerned about it is the fiscal deficit. After this commodity prices going down, what you see is all the countries from Mexico to Chile have a large fiscal deficit, which probably is something that we need to tackle on. Otherwise, inflation is going to go up, interest rates is going to go up, and if all the variables start moving, that I think is going to be a lot worse than the situation that you are seeing now.
As an American entrepreneur going into a foreign country, I think that one thing that I like to hear, though, is how friendly are you guys overseas? Because in a presentation I did on Peru, while I study, I found that the Peruvian government is very friendly, and that is an attraction to foreign investment. So we have Chile investing in Peru $7 billion. Falabella is one of the biggest companies in Chile, investing in Latin America $52 billion. So I wonder, each of you represent a country in Latin America. How friendly are they? Because that will be my interest, whether I'm going to make a decision in going to your country or not. If you're friendly, you're not friendly, forget.
So we have the friendship index now.
Yeah.
Friendliness index.
I think
business index.
I think the ambassador hit on something when you mentioned Cuba. I mean, I think it depends. The friendliness is also a function of what are you bringing to the country, okay? If it's something that the country needs and wants, you're probably going to be very, very friendly. If it is something that they don't want or is not necessary, okay, it's probably going to be less friendly, just at a high level.
Yeah, comments on that.
Well, I represent the United States. I think the United States is very friendly. But it depends what you mean by friendly. I think I could make an argument that I don't care if they're friendly or not. I want to know, are the rules clear? Is there rule of law? Exactly. Are contracts respected? Can I repatriate capital? You can be, a dour reception or a friendly reception. But if those things are clear, that would interest me more, and I would be cautious of simply, responding to what I think we see all over the world, not just in Latin America, and we see it in Cuba. Please come and invest. We love you. We'll do everything for you. You get there and you realize you have to have a joint partner. The partner is probably a member of the Communist Party or an army general who has no interest and doesn't understand basic business theory. Once you get there, the law will change in a year and all your investment is locked in. That, from my understanding, my experience talking to businessmen who are coming in and establishing, those are the sorts of answers they seek, because probably on a barometer of friendliness, they're all going to be friendly.
Let me try to answer this from the Chilean company point of view. When we go to, or when we decided to go to Peru, and I would say, from the cultural point of view, I think the relationship between Peru and Chile is I mean, we are always looking at each other, always.
Tense. It's tense.
Yeah. and the type of economic policy is very similar. Both are very orthodox in some way. Low tariff, inflation control. So the Chilean companies are very comfortable in Peru, I would say. Countries very similar, and Chilean companies are very successful in Peru. Chilean companies have been going to Brazil too, but they have been suffering a lot. It's a different country, a different culture, a different language, and the economic policy is different too. And it's hard to deal with that. And there is a lot of, I mean, in industries that are working for real estate and retail connected, in Chile, most of the companies or the product that we are selling are not manufactured in Chile. They are all mostly international, mostly buy somewhere else. But in Brazil, there are a lot of retail products manufactured in Brazil. So there is big players who are Brazilians, and they want to play their own game. In Colombia, I think there are companies, Chilean companies going to Colombia, and there are ones who are doing so-so, and another they're doing bad. And actually, two companies, two department stores, La Polar and Ripley, they said, we were not successful, we failed in Colombia, and we leave the country. This is because Colombia is not friendly? No, because Colombia is friendly. However, they have different rules. They have a protected manufacture industry in Medellin, for example. If tariffs are big, in Chile and Peru, tariffs are very low. Falabella went to Colombia, and after 6 months, the government decided to increase the tariff. And most of the products that Falabella sell in Colombia were imported. So was affected by the regulation. If they were in Colombia and they had agreement with the Colombian manufacturer companies, maybe he did better. But again, you have to, rules are different. When you are going to a meeting in Colombia, Colombians look US. They are always looking US. They don't know that the South exists. If you go to a meeting, you are, I don't know, somebody. When you go to a meeting in Peru, you are a Chilean guy who came for a country who have been doing really well, and they know the Chilean history better than you, probably. And so it's friendly, it's culture, our rules too, and I think but are friendly.
Well, we would love to, of course, hear from the panel, this wonderful panel, great knowledge base, but I think everybody's ready for cocktails, so let me just kind of wrap up as to what my takeaway is, that is actually very optimistic as a result of this panel, that while there are these challenges and old governance and infrastructure challenges and so forth, we have now built-in mechanisms in macroeconomic policies to respond to crises. We have a lot of trade opening, a lot of opening to investment for Latin American companies to have access to foreign markets as well as to foreign investors to come in. And we have these world-class management practices that are probably not discussed enough in Brazil, in Mexico, in Chile, and so on, in the region. And somehow these companies are beating the odds, if you will. They are managing the risks and they are pursuing new markets in the region. So I think it's a very kind of optimistic note that I take away. And besides, it is a very friendly region and we have a very friendly panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.